New Zealand likes priding itself on the fact that we're into innovation, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a farmer on the land, or Peter Jackson making movies, or people turning that magnificent alchemic basis of turning grapes into some of the best wine in the world. We like to think that we are innovators and leaders, and we can do it pretty bloody well. And fashion has been one of those areas in my lifetime where the concept of New Zealand fashion maybe 50 years ago would have been considered risible. Then suddenly New Zealand fashion designers were leading the world, and we had obviously names abroad like Karen Walker and my next guest, Annah Stretton, but a whole series of world designers, etc., that we thought led the world. But now New Zealand Fashion Week has been cancelled. The industry says it's in a lot of trouble, and that is despite the fact that it claims to have pumped over $7 billion into the economy last year, which is 2% of our GDP. That seems unusually high. To talk about the fashion industry, though, in general, and what's wrong with the wider trends, and is there something that is being done about it, or is just the way it's going, and like all manufacturing in this country is simply going to be outsourced, is one of New Zealand's leading fashion designers and businesswoman, Annah Stretton, and she joins us now. Annah, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Michael. I think I'm actually sitting here thinking I should have perhaps been part of the original conversation around the work that I do in the prison, but I'm really happy to talk to fashion. So,
I'm glad you, because I've just seen that. I've read a bit of a profile of you, and which says, and it was written last year, and it's got down the bottom of it, Annah Stretton, and it gives you a bit of a background to you, sort of who you are, what you've done, but it goes on to say that you're a woman's activist, a feminist activist, I think it said, and I think it said something along incarcerated feminist activist. What's that about?
Yeah, well, I guess here we are hijacking the fashion conversation, but for me, it was about, for the last 10 years, I've worked in the Auckland Women's Prison, which is our largest women's prison, endeavouring to think a little differently around what needs to happen in there to get a different outcome. I mean, we continue to do the same thing, and therefore we obviously get the same outcomes. But for me, the absolute goal of this work that I've been doing, I've now gone and put 2 master's degrees behind this to endeavour to sort of amplify that conversation and add some sense to it. But I really now believe we have, I can sort of start to shed some light on how we can do this differently and how we can get a better outcome. And you're right, it's totally intergenerational. We've got a whole generation of people that have normalised just criminal outcomes, criminal activities, and they're not fearful of the system of detainment as they get caught up in that. It's just a rite of passage. It is what it is.
Yeah, no, it's depressing and dangerous, and it's not. Nothing we're doing seems to be making a difference. Just before we talk about fashion,
I guess.
Well, no, you talk to me about that. Tell me what you think makes it soluble.
Well, no, solvable. I think it's
solvable.
I don't, we continue to work in the same space, doing the same stuff, getting the same outcome, and we just need to think a little differently. And I honestly believe this is the one sector where we don't listen to the voice of the incarcerated person. We don't privilege that voice. We don't include it in any of the decision-making process, and therefore we continue to get outcomes that are driven by people that haven't been incarcerated, haven't experienced criminal lifestyles, haven't been caught up in those impoverished spaces. So there's a different conversation that needs to happen, and I guess for the last however many years I've got left, I intend to activate that. So that's where that activism comes from. I intend to activate it on behalf of incarcerated women, and we now have 90 women in that cohort, and we preference women that have been in the prison system most of their lives.
Okay, just thinking, I'm thinking a couple of things. One thing that struck me is that violent women seem to be a feature of our incarceration today in a scale that I don't think we've probably seen in the history of New Zealand. Again, is that because of the environment in which those prisoners come out of, that level of violence is so extreme these days?
Well, I think it's a whole lot of things. I mean, you're looking at a generation of women, and I'm talking about those women, and that's only a small percentage of the prison population, but those tended to be, I guess, more spotlighted through COVID, because a lot of, I guess, the court activity wasn't as frequent, and therefore those charges that weren't as serious weren't actually happening. So the prison were left with more of a violent cohort that were in there. But I guess for me, I've walked alongside for 10 years now, and that's no short amount of time. Women that have had to fight for their survival from the age of 2, and the only way they know how to do that is through violence, and the violence is very normalised, and so that plays out not only inside but outside as well. They've just normalised a very different way of living. I mean, and I guess as a Western approach, we've become a lot more communicative around the space and how we can, get to an outcome that we want to get to, where in there they're very used to actually just getting it through physical violence.
How did you get into this? Because, as you say, the aegis of our conversation was to start. I'm glad, in actual fact. I mean, you're the perfect guest for this perfect place, actually.
Yeah.
How did you get into this? Because originally, there you are, you're setting up as a fashion designer. You've got your own line of... My wife said to me, tell Anna I buy her clothes. And so, you have enormous public credibility in this space. How on earth did you get into the prison space?
Well, I guess for me, as I built a successful fashion brand, I knew that I had to be more than just a healthy bottom line. So I aligned with a lot of different charities as I came along, but it was incredibly tokenistic, and I kind of did what everyone did. I gave them garments, I did fashion shows for them, I created T-shirts. I did all that sort of stuff that kind of is helpful and useful for raising brand profiles, not only for myself, but also for the organisation or the charitable organisation itself. I kind of got to a stage where I thought, I want to do something that's a lot more personable, perhaps not as easy for the public to understand or digest, and I really didn't know what that looked like, but I just didn't want to be continuing to do the same stuff that everybody else was doing. And it was the Waikato Women's Refuge that came out to see me. They were in a lot of trouble financially, and they were looking to, get me to support and align with them in a way that would assist them, become a lot more sustainable in their financial operations. I agreed to help them, but that was my first connection with Māori. Ironically, I was born in Whanganui, which I know you have as well. But
where'd you go to school?
That was my real... I went to school at Karamu High School in...
so you went to Hawke's Bay.
I was born in Whanganui, and then went to Hawke's Bay. And that's kind of where I spent my formative years. But for me, with the Waikato Women's Refuge, I started to connect with Māori, and I started to get an insight into Māori and realised how privileged and, I guess, almost... racist I was in my approach to Māori, and that was a massive journey for me. But I also looked at their work as crisis work, and while I knew it was necessary, I thought we need to start doing some change work here. We need to teach people how to fish, not continue to give them fish, because we're just creating a generation of entitlement, and we've already got that. We're already there.
Late now.
So I set up Raw, which was effectively off the back of Refuge. It wasn't aligned to them, but it was seeded through there, where young girls that were part of the gangs were using the services of Refuge just as respite care, really. They were always going back. The violence had just got a bit, had amplified, so they'd chosen to sort of seek some solace with Refuge, but they were heading back into their relationships. So I got a huge understanding of violent relationships, of methamphetamine, of all sorts of different things that attach to gangs, and just a lifestyle that was so different to mine growing up in the hills of Havelock North, and going to all the right schools and having very kind of caring and nurturing parents. And I came from a family of 5, so it was substantive enough. But I set up Raw. I started to work alongside Refuge. I realised that women living in chaos were not going to be able to think about change. And so I then started to think about where could women that were relatively similar to some of the women in Refuge that I was wanting to preference be found, where they might be a little more stable in their thought patterns. And the prisons came under my radar. So I unashamedly used my brand to knock down the door of the CEO of Corrections. He was just kind of curious to know what a fashion designer would want with his prisons, and so I got my audience. I got into Auckland Women's and I started to work with a cohort of women in there around, thinking differently around the approach to creating opportunity that would be of value to them on exit. And so Raw, on exit, if they choose to come to us, sets up a lifelong program of wraparound. So once you're part of Raw, you're there for life. So we've got girls buying businesses, we've got girls completing masters, we've got girls working with disadvantaged kids, we've got girls doing all sorts of different things, but there's 90 of them now.